Part 1. When America was quiet enough to hear itself think. Hey guys, tonight, dim the lights a little. Put your phone face down. Let the room get comfortably quiet. Tonight, we're drifting back into a version of America that feels almost imaginary now. Not perfect, not innocent, just slower, quieter, less aggressively online. This is not a hype story. Nothing explodes, nobody wins a championship, no one learns a big inspirational lesson. This is a calm walk through an America that once had time. Too much time, maybe. The kind of time where people stood on porches and stared at nothing in particular, because there was nothing else demanding their attention every 3 seconds. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and let's begin gently with a country that had not yet learned how loud it could become. America in its earlier centuries was not quiet because it was peaceful in a moral sense. It was quiet because communication was inconvenient. You could not instantly share your opinion with strangers. You could not doom scroll your way into existential exhaustion before breakfast. If you were angry, you had to stay angry alone for a while, which honestly builds character, or ulcers, sometimes both. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, most Americans lived lives defined by repetition. Wake up, work, eat something bland, go to sleep. News traveled slowly, which meant panic traveled slowly too. If something terrible happened 3 states away, you might hear about it weeks later. By then, the emotional urgency had faded. The tragedy was already old. People had moved on to worrying about crops or whether their neighbor was stealing fence posts again. And yes, neighbors were usually the main drama, not global politics, not stock markets, just the guy next door who definitely borrowed your tools and absolutely did not return them. American towns were small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, but large enough that nobody felt obligated to fix it, a delicate balance. Let's drift into one of these towns for a moment. Picture unpaved roads, wooden storefronts, a general store that sells everything and excels at nothing. There's a blacksmith somewhere hitting metal with confidence. There's a dog sleeping in the middle of the street because traffic is not a concern yet. No one honks, no one yells. The dog stays. This America ran on daylight. When the sun went down, life simply powered off. Candles were precious. Entertainment was limited. Silence filled the gaps. And silence back then was normal, not something to be feared. Not something to fill with podcasts or background noise, just silence doing its job. People talked more slowly, not because they were wiser, because there was no rush. Letters took weeks to arrive. If someone insulted you in writing, you had plenty of time to cool off before reading it. Sometimes the anger evaporated before the envelope was even opened, which is frankly an underrated system. Now, let's gently float forward into the 19th century. America is growing, expanding, stretching itself thin across a continent. But even as cities began to form, life still moved at a human pace. Factories existed, sure, but shifts ended. Work stopped. There was a clear line between labor and rest. No emails followed you home, no notifications buzzed at dinner. If your boss wanted to reach you after hours, that was simply too bad. And Americans slept deeply, without blue light, without anxiety spirals fueled by constant updates. Of course, this doesn't mean people were happy all the time. They were just unhappy more quietly. Take the American elite, for example. Wealthy landowners, industrialists, early political families. These people had power, money, and influence, but very little stimulation, which led to boredom, and boredom, historically, is responsible for some truly questionable decisions. Elite Americans filled their days with long meals, long conversations, and longer grudges. Feuds could last decades, not because anyone was actively angry every day, but because there was no pressure to resolve anything quickly. If someone wronged you, you simply remembered. Forever. Politics, too, was slower. Debates took weeks. Legislation crawled forward at a pace that would cause modern commentators to combust. There was no 24-hour news cycle, no live outrage, no panels of people yelling over each other. Just men in rooms talking at length, often badly, and then adjourning for dinner. And dinner mattered. Food was not rushed. Meals were events. Conversation lingered. Afterward, people sat. They didn't multitask. They didn't scroll. They just sat. This is where the peacefulness creeps in, not because life was fair, but because it was not relentless. Let's take a breath here. Now slide into the early 19th century. America is modernizing. Electricity is spreading. Cities are buzzing, but still contained. Even New York, as loud as it was, had moments of quiet. Nighttime still meant something. Businesses closed. People went home. Entertainment was scheduled. You had to show up at a certain time to experience it. If you missed it, that was it. No replay, no rewind. Which means anticipation mattered, and anticipation slows the mind. Radio enters American homes, and suddenly voices travel across distances, but still in controlled doses. You listened when the program aired. Then it ended. Silence returned. No endless autoplay, no algorithm gently shoving you into the next thing. Even tragedy arrived with restraint. Newspapers were read once a day, not constantly refreshed. You processed events in batches. That space between information allowed people to feel complete, not informed about everything, but grounded in something. Let's drift toward mid-century America now, the era people romanticize endlessly, sometimes inaccurately, sometimes with selective memory. Suburban streets, lawns trimmed within an inch of their lives, children riding bikes without supervision that would horrify modern parents. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Was it quieter? Undeniably. Television existed, but it did not dominate. Channels were few. Programming ended for the night. Literally ended. The screen went blank. Imagine that, the machine telling you it's time to stop. Adults talked to each other. Neighbors waved. There was time between moments. People complained less, not because things were better, but because complaining required effort. You had to talk to a real person, face to face, awkward pauses included. So most people saved their complaints for things that truly bothered them, or at least bothered them consistently. And now, as we let this part of the story gently fade, notice how nothing dramatic happened. No big turning point, no shocking reveal, just a gradual hum of life at a lower volume. We're still in America, still familiar, still mostly calm, but now things are starting to hum a bit louder. Not roar, not scream, just a steady increase in background noise that no one really questioned at first. Because why would they? The early mid-century American didn't wake up one day and think, wow, everything is about to become overwhelming. They woke up, made coffee, read the paper, and went to work. And that work was changing. Factories became more efficient, offices multiplied, time clocks mattered more, schedules tightened. Still reasonable, still human, but the margins were shrinking. Commutes got longer, not unbearably long, just long enough to notice. Cars filled the roads, and with them came a new kind of sound. Engines, horns, movement that didn't stop at sunset. Cities began glowing at night, which felt magical at first. Lights meant safety, progress, possibility. But light also meant sleep became optional. Americans started staying up later not because they had to, because they could. Television, now firmly planted in living rooms, became the evening ritual. Families gathered. Programs were watched together. There was still a shared experience, still limits, but the TV never got tired. And slowly, the living room stopped being a place for conversation and became a place for consumption. No one noticed the shift. It was gentle, polite. Of course, advertisers noticed. Suddenly, Americans were not just citizens or workers. They were audiences. Their attention mattered. Their focus could be captured, held, redirected. And once attention becomes a resource, someone will always want more of it. Still, life outside the screen remained relatively slow. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Adults chatted over fences. Weekends meant something. Sundays were quiet enough to feel heavy. Stores closed, phones rang unanswered. People rested, not as a productivity strategy, but because nothing else was happening. Let's linger here for a second. This version of America
still had boredom. Real boredom. The kind where you stare at the ceiling, where your mind wanders, where ideas form accidentally. Boredom, it turns out, was a feature, not a flaw. But boredom makes some people uncomfortable, and discomfort eventually gets solved. Enter the late 20th century. Computers arrive. At first, they're clunky, slow, not threatening. They sit on desks and hum quietly. They don't demand constant interaction. Then they shrink, speed up, multiply, and with them comes efficiency. Emails replace letters. Instant communication becomes normal. At first, this feels incredible. Why wait weeks when you can know something now? Why sit with uncertainty when clarity is a click away? And again, no one panics because each change is small, but the silence is thinning. News cycles accelerate. Information refreshes faster. Instead of one newspaper, there are many sources. Instead of one story, there are updates. Urgency creeps in. If something happens, you should know immediately. If you don't, you're behind. Behind what? No one is quite sure. Work follows people home now, not physically, digitally. The boundary between labor and rest blurs. Americans still relax, but relaxation becomes intentional, scheduled, optimized. Vacations become checklists, leisure becomes content. And then, quietly, the internet moves in. At first, it's slow enough to be charming, dial-up tones, static images, patience required. You log on, you log off, still balanced. But the potential is obvious. Everything, everywhere, all at once. Eventually. Social spaces move online, forums, chats, early platforms where anonymity gives people permission to say things they'd never say out loud. And suddenly, America is talking constantly. Not conversing, talking. Voices overlap, opinions stack, reactions multiply. Silence becomes suspicious. If you're quiet, are you uninformed, uninterested, hiding something? So people fill the space, with posts, with updates, with thoughts that might have once drifted away unspoken. And the volume keeps rising. Phones shrink again, fit into pockets, never leave your side. Now the noise follows you everywhere. Waiting rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms. Moments that used to belong to no one now belong to everyone. And still Americans adapt, because adaptation is what they do. They scroll while standing in line. They check messages at red lights. They listen to something at all times. Silence becomes rare, almost exotic. But something is lost in the trade. The mind never fully rests. It hops, skips,
refreshes, attention fractures, and peace, the kind that comes from nothing happening, becomes difficult to access. Let's float gently toward the present now. Modern America is loud even when it's quiet. Notifications buzz, screens glow, information never sleeps. Even at night, the world hums. People fall asleep to voices in their ears, podcasts, videos, noise replacing stillness. Not because they want stimulation, but because silence feels unfamiliar. And that's the strange part. The peaceful America didn't disappear in a single moment. It wasn't taken, it was traded. Convenience for calm, speed for space, connection for quiet. No villain, no conspiracy, just momentum. And momentum is hard to stop. But traces remain. Early mornings, empty streets, late nights when the world briefly exhales, moments when the phone is forgotten in another room, when time stretches just a little. These moments feel powerful now, not because they're dramatic, but because they're rare. In the next part, we'll drift into the emotional consequences of this shift, how Americans began feeling busier even when doing less, more connected, yet oddly alone. For now, let your thoughts slow again. Imagine a porch, a chair, no screen, just air moving gently past. That America isn't gone. It's just quieter than everything else. Let's settle back in. If your breathing has slowed, good. If your mind wandered, even better. That's exactly how this part of the story likes to be heard. We're now in an America that moves quickly, but feels strangely stuck. Always in motion, rarely going anywhere restful. Somewhere along the way, Americans stopped asking, "How are you?" and started answering with "busy." Busy became a badge, a signal, proof that you mattered. If you weren't busy, people got suspicious. Were you unmotivated? Lazy? Secretly failing? Of course not. You were probably just sitting still, which had quietly become unacceptable. Work expanded to fill every available corner of the day, not always with more labor, but with more awareness of labor. You might not be working, but you were thinking about work, checking messages, anticipating tasks, planning responses. The mind never clocked out. And when work wasn't filling the space, entertainment rushed in to help. Streaming platforms, endless choices, nothing ever truly finished. There was always something else to watch, another episode starting automatically, another suggestion waiting patiently. This was marketed as freedom, and in a way it was. But it also meant the mind never reached a natural stopping point. Older forms of entertainment ended, the book closed, the show signed off. Now, stopping requires effort, and effort is tiring. So people kept going. Social media, of course, perfected this. Here, everyone could be busy performing, posting, reacting, comparing. Life became visible, curated, filtered. People were not just living anymore. They were documenting the fact that they were living, which added another layer of mental noise. Am I doing enough? Am I enjoying this correctly? Does this look peaceful? Ironically, the pursuit of a peaceful image often created stress. Even rest became productive. Sleep was optimized. Meditation was timed. Relaxation was scheduled between obligations. The natural drift of earlier American life, the unplanned hours, the empty afternoons, felt wasteful now. Waste, after all, is the enemy of efficiency. And efficiency, while useful, is not particularly calming. Americans began feeling tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Not physically exhausted, mentally crowded. Too many thoughts, too many inputs. The brain, which once had long stretches of nothing, now hopped from stimulus to stimulus without pause. And this affected relationships. Conversations shortened, listening became harder. People spoke while thinking about something else, while checking something else, while half present. Moments lost their edges. Time felt compressed. A week passed quickly. A year vanished. Memories blurred. In the quieter America, time felt heavy. Now it felt slippery. Let's slow this down. Imagine telling someone in 1850 that future Americans would carry small glowing rectangles that demanded their attention dozens of times per hour. They would nod politely and then absolutely not believe you. And yet, here we are. But even now, the desire for peace hasn't disappeared. It just expresses itself differently. Americans chase quiet in fragments. Noise-canceling headphones, white noise machines, retreats, apps designed to simulate nothing. We build elaborate systems to recreate what once existed naturally. And when those systems fail, people blame themselves. I'm bad at relaxing. I can't shut my brain off. As if calm were a skill issue.
But calm was never something to achieve. It was something that happened when there was room. Earlier America had room, physical room, mental room. Not because people were wiser, but because fewer things were asking for their attention. Now, attention is constantly harvested, and harvested fields need time to recover. Some Americans sense this intuitively. They unplug on weekends, move to quieter places, romanticize small towns. They're not chasing the past exactly. They're chasing space. The kind of space where thoughts don't compete, where silence isn't awkward, where nothing happening is allowed. This longing is subtle, not loud enough to trend, but persistent. It shows up in the popularity of slow living, minimalism, digital detoxes. Each is an attempt to lower the volume, but the world keeps turning loudly. And so the peaceful America survives mostly in memory and imagination, or in brief moments when the noise recedes, a snowfall, a power outage, a quiet morning before anyone else wakes up. In those moments, something familiar returns, a sense that life does not need commentary to be real, that presence does not require proof, and that peace is not absence, but permission. In the next part, we'll drift into how Americans remember the quiet, how nostalgia smooths edges and edits out discomfort, and why the past always feels calmer than it really was. For now, let the story keep flowing. No rush, no notifications, just the gentle idea that once, not so long ago, America knew how to be still. Part 4. Remembering the quiet more gently than it ever was. All right, we're still floating. Nothing to do, nowhere to be. This part of the story lives mostly in memory, which means it's softer, blurrier around the edges, and honestly, a little kinder than reality ever was. Because when Americans look back at the peaceful past, they're not remembering everything. They're remembering how it felt. And feelings are selective. Nostalgia is not a historian. It's an editor. It removes discomfort. It fades inconvenience. It lowers the volume on anything unpleasant. In memory, small towns are always charming, never stifling, never judgmental, never bored out of their minds. Porches are always warm. Neighbors are always friendly. Nobody is trapped. Nobody is lonely. Which, of course, is not how it actually worked. Earlier America was quieter, yes, but quiet does not automatically mean kind. Silence can be peaceful. It can also be isolating. If you didn't fit in, if you were different, if you wanted more than what your town offered, that quiet could feel heavy, pressing, endless. But memory smooths that out. What people miss is not the limitations, they miss the pace. They miss how time stretched. Days felt longer, not because life was better, but because it was less crowded. You remember waiting, standing still, letting thoughts wander. You remember not knowing everything and being okay with that. Modern America knows too much, too fast, and forgets just as quickly. So the past becomes a refuge, a place to rest mentally, even if it was never truly restful. This is why old photos feel calm, even when the people in them were stressed, tired, or deeply annoyed. The stillness of the image does the work. No motion, no sound, no updates. Just a frozen moment that asks nothing from you. And Americans return to these moments again and again. Vintage aesthetics, retro diners, black and white footage. Not because they want to go back exactly, but because they want to slow down emotionally. There's something comforting about a world where everything has already happened. No surprises, no alerts, just stories with known endings. And America tells itself these stories often. This was simpler. This was better. This made sense. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's just comforting. Let's drift through a few of these remembered scenes. A quiet suburban afternoon, nothing scheduled, no rush. A family dinner where no one checks a phone, not because of discipline, because phones don't exist yet. A road trip without GPS, getting lost, not panicking. In memory, getting lost feels adventurous. In real time, it was mostly confusing and mildly irritating. But memory edits that too. And so, the peaceful America becomes almost mythical, a feeling more than a place. Which raises an interesting question. Was America actually more peaceful, or did it simply leave people alone more often? Being left alone, it turns out, does wonders for the nervous system. Modern America rarely leaves anyone alone. Even when you're physically alone, something is reaching for you. A message, a reminder, a suggestion. Earlier America had gaps, and those gaps mattered. In those gaps, people processed emotions slowly. Grief took time. Joy lingered. Now, emotions are often interrupted. You feel something, and then you're notified of something else. The moment passes unfinished. This is why the past feels complete. Events had beginnings, middles, and ends. Now everything overlaps, and memory, trying to cope, reaches backwards. But memory is not trying to escape forward progress. It's trying to reclaim rhythm. The steady rhythm of days that were allowed to repeat. Wake, work, eat, rest. Not glamorous, not exciting, but predictable. And predictability feels safe. As America became louder and faster, unpredictability increased. News changed hourly. Trends shifted weekly. Norms dissolved quietly. Stability became something you had to create yourself, and not everyone knows how to do that. So nostalgia fills the gap. It says, once things stayed still enough to understand them. Whether or not that's fully true doesn't matter. The feeling does. And so the idea of a peaceful America lives on, in documentaries, in aesthetic videos, in late-night thoughts when the world feels too sharp. It's a soft place to land mentally, a reminder that humans were not always sprinting, that silence existed without effort, that time did not need to be managed. In the next part, we'll gently explore whether that peace can exist again, not by going backwards, but by choosing differently within the noise. For now, let the memory fade slowly, not rushing, just another quiet evening in a country that once knew how to pause, and might remember again, if it wanted.
Part 5. Looking for peace without turning back the clock. Let's keep drifting. Nothing dramatic happens here. No big solutions, no bold declarations. Just a slow consideration of what peace might look like now in a country that has learned how to be loud. Because here's the thing. America can't go back. Not really. Not in any meaningful way. The past is not a place you can return to. It's a mood you sometimes recreate by accident, and that's important. The peaceful America wasn't peaceful because of horse-drawn carriages or black and white televisions. It was peaceful because fewer things demanded immediate reaction. So if peace is going to exist again, it won't look old-fashioned. It will look intentional. And intention, as it turns out, is tiring at first. Modern Americans who try to reclaim quiet often describe it strangely, not as relief, but as discomfort. Silence feels loud when you're not used to it. A quiet room makes thoughts echo. An empty afternoon feels suspicious. You reach for your phone without realizing it, not because you need anything, because your hands expect occupation. Earlier Americans didn't have to resist distraction. Distraction had to work harder to reach them. Now the effort is reversed. So people start small. They sit outside without headphones. They leave the phone in another room. They walk without documenting the walk. And at first it feels pointless. Nothing is happening, which is exactly the point, but it takes time to remember that. Peace is not stimulation, it's absence of demand. And modern life runs on demand. Respond, react, engage, share. Choosing not to participate feels rebellious, almost rude, but some Americans do it anyway. They wake up early before the world wakes up with them. They savor those quiet minutes like contraband. They notice birds again, wind, distant traffic that sounds softer from far away. They discover that calm still exists, but it hides. It hides in margins, in transitions, in moments no one monetized yet. And this brings us to an uncomfortable truth. Peaceful America never disappeared entirely. It just stopped being profitable. Silence doesn't trend well. Stillness doesn't scale. So it slipped out of focus. But individuals can still access it. Not permanently, not perfectly, just enough. Enough to remember that the nervous system is not meant to be constantly addressed. Enough to let a thought finish. Enough to feel a day instead of consuming it. This doesn't require moving to a cabin or rejecting technology entirely. That's another fantasy. It requires boundaries.
Earlier America had boundaries built in: night, distance, inconvenience. Modern America erased those boundaries in the name of access. So now boundaries must be rebuilt by hand. And that's hard. It means letting messages wait, letting boredom exist, letting silence stretch. It means accepting that you don't need to witness everything, that not knowing is survivable. Earlier Americans didn't know most things, and they lived. They worried about what was near, what they could touch, what directly affected them. Modern Americans carry the emotional weight of the entire world. No one is built for that. So peace now looks modest. It looks like fewer tabs open, fewer opinions formed, fewer moments interrupted. It looks like presence without performance. And slowly, very slowly, this starts to feel familiar. Not nostalgic, not old-fashioned, just human. The same calm that once lived naturally in American life still lives in American bodies. It just needs permission. And that permission rarely comes from the outside. It comes when someone decides that not every moment needs to be filled, that nothing happening is allowed, that being unreachable for a while is not a failure. In the final part, we'll let this story wind down naturally. No conclusion, no lesson. Just a gentle settling into the idea that peace is not something America lost forever. It's something that waits quietly, patiently, for anyone willing to slow down enough to notice it.
Part 6. Letting the story go quiet on its own. All right, we're almost at the end now. Not the kind of end with a moral, not a wrap-up that tells you what to do next. Just the kind of ending that drifts off, the same way this story began. Because peaceful America, in the end, was never a destination, it was a condition. A condition created by space, by limits, by time that wasn't constantly being negotiated. And as this long, slow walk through the past comes to rest, something becomes clear. America didn't used to feel peaceful because people were better. They were just less interrupted. Their thoughts had time to finish forming. Their emotions had time to settle. Their days had edges. Morning felt like morning. Night felt like night. There was a natural rhythm holding everything together. Now rhythm has to be chosen, and chosen again and again. Which can feel exhausting, but it can also feel grounding. Because choosing quiet, even briefly, is an act of care, not productivity, not optimization. Care. Earlier Americans didn't call it that. They didn't have to. They sat on porches because there was nowhere else to be. They stared at the sky because nothing else was asking for their eyes. They rested because rest arrived on its own. And when you strip away the nostalgia, the aesthetics, the stories we tell ourselves, that's what people miss. Not the past, the pause, the permission to stop without explanation. And that permission still exists. It exists late at night when notifications slow, early in the morning before the world checks in. It exists in small towns and big cities alike, in quiet rooms, in parked cars, in moments where no one is watching. It exists whenever someone decides not to fill the space. And maybe that's where we leave this. Not with a statement about America, but with a moment inside it. No commentary, no analysis. Just a breath. A sense that once things moved slower,
And that slowness is not gone. It's just waiting. Waiting quietly, like a country at rest, remembering how to be still. Part 7. The last quiet moment before sleep. Okay, this is the last part. Nothing new is introduced here. No fresh ideas, no history lessons. This is just the slow settling after a long day of thinking. If you've stayed with this story all the way through, your mind has probably softened a bit. Thoughts less sharp, time less urgent. That's not an accident. Stories like this were never meant to energize. They were meant to accompany, like the sound of a train passing far away. Present, but not demanding. And that feels appropriate for how this story ends. Because peaceful America, when you really look at it, was never a single era. It wasn't the 1800s. It wasn't the 1950s. It wasn't some perfect year frozen in amber. It was a relationship with time. Time moved slowly enough to be felt. Days were allowed to be empty. Moments weren't constantly evaluated. People lived inside their lives instead of above them. And when life felt overwhelming, it stayed local. It didn't arrive from everywhere at once. That doesn't mean people were wiser, or happier, or more fulfilled. It just means their nervous systems weren't being tapped on the shoulder every few minutes. They had room to be tired in peace, room to be bored, room to be quiet without explanation. And that room still exists. Not as a countrywide condition, not as a shared rhythm, but as a personal one, a small one. The kind you create unintentionally when you stop trying to fill every second. When you let a thought trail off instead of chasing the next one. When you don't reach for anything at all. In those moments, something familiar returns. Not nostalgia, not memory, just stillness. And stillness doesn't care what year it is. So as this story finally lets go, there's nothing to take with you. No lesson to remember, no action to perform. Just the idea that peace was never something America owned or lost. It was something people stepped into whenever the world gave them room. And sometimes, when the noise fades on its own, that room is still here, right now. So if your eyes are heavy, let them close. If your thoughts are slowing, let them drift. This story doesn't need an ending. It just goes quiet.